Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Here at Wisdom for Working Mums, you hear me talking a lot about mums, and every now and again I get challenged with the "what about the dads" question. And it's a fair question. When I first started Wisdom for Working Mums, I did debate whether it needed to be Wisdom for Working Parents, but I felt that I could speak to the experience of women and mothers so much more than for men and fathers. But I'm conscious that men need support too. Recent research shows that 1 in 10 new dads will experience some symptoms of postnatal depression, and 39% of expectant dads are concerned about their mental health. And those statistics are from the Fathers Reaching Out report. The mental health of men is still overlooked, with suicide remaining the biggest killer of men under the age of 45, and 12.5% of men in the UK suffering from depression and anxiety. New dads are particularly vulnerable as financial and work pressures coupled with a huge life change can have a significant impact. Dads' poor mental health negatively impacts support for mothers and the development of children. So today's conversation is a much needed one. I met today's podcast guest during a parental burnout roundtable that we were both invited to participate in. I was blown away by his passion and purpose to bring awareness of dads' mental health, equal parenting, work-life balance and masculinity to the mainstream. Elliott Rae is an author, speaker and founder of MusicFootballFatherhood, the UK's most exciting parenting and lifestyle platform for men. Elliott is encouraging open conversations about fatherhood. His book, Dad, Untold Stories of Fatherhood, Love, Mental Health and Masculinity is a must-read. Each chapter is a story from a different dad and takes you on a journey, and each dad bears his soul and their deeply personal stories. Elliott was diagnosed with PTSD after the traumatic birth of his daughter. It's that experience that led him to dedicate his life's work to creating spaces for more open conversations around fatherhood and changing the narrative. And this episode launches on Father's Day week in the UK, and it's the most incredible way to acknowledge and celebrate fathers. And I can't wait to dive into this conversation with Elliott. You're going to love what he's got to share. Ever wondered how other women manage their careers and motherhood? When I first became a mum, my fascination with how other women did it started. How were they combining their work and motherhood in a way that worked for them? Maybe I'm nosy, but I like to think of myself as curious. Maybe it's because I saw other women thriving and I wanted to know how they were doing it. I've learned over the years that a key element of performance is what they call in NLP, modelling. Modelling is observing and copying the way others achieve results. It makes it easier to try out different approaches to see what works for us. If you want to know how to do something, find some people who are good at that thing and ask them what they do. And that's just what I'm going to be doing. If, like me, you find yourself wondering how other women do it, then come and join me for the How She Does It mini-series. I'm interviewing 5 working mothers and pulling back the curtain on how they do it, revealing the secrets, strategies and lessons that they've learned along the way that we can all learn from. You're not going to want to miss out on this. Head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk/how she does it to find out the details. So welcome, Elliott. It's a real honour to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, me too. And obviously we first met on a parental burnout roundtable that we did. And I was really struck by your purpose, your passion, and just how you were showing up and sharing. And I was like, actually, I'm learning so much from you. And I think my listeners would also love what you've got to say. So I'm really delighted that you joined me.
Oh, thank you. It's very flattering. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So I always like to start with people's story, and I would love for you to share actually how you came to do the work that you're now doing. So I think your daughter was born in 2015, was it? And that kind of sparked this journey.
It was, yeah. So I've worked in corporate spaces for a while, a long career in the civil service, and alongside that, I was in a band with my wife as well. So when I hit 31, we'd been married for a year, and I was broody. and my wife was broody as well. And we were ready to start our family. So all was going well. We had a little flat in Walthamstow. We had decent jobs. Life was good. We went on loads of holidays, and we conceived quite quickly as well. And the pregnancy, as pregnancies go, was kind of fairly smooth up until the end, where we received a letter that the hospital had found Group B strep, which is a kind of common bacterial infection that a lot of women will carry during pregnancy. But they reassured us that my wife would have intravenous antibiotics during the labor, and that would stop the infection being passed on to our child. So we were kind of very apprehensive, but once we had the meeting with the midwife and they explained that, we were calm. We'd done hypnobirthing, so we felt like we were ready. But the labor was really long, and really difficult. Lots of ups and downs around blood pressure and heart rate, and lots of moments where the doctors would come in and move us to a different ward and do loads of checks and all that sort of stuff. And after 24 hours, my daughter was born. They used a ventouse to bring her out. And when she was born, she was very unwell, very grey, lifeless. At the same time, my wife was losing a lot of blood as well. So really, really difficult moment, a moment of numbness, of not knowing what to do with myself. I think, the first time as an adult, I can remember really not knowing what to do, not having any control, feeling completely helpless in the situation, and having that choice about, do I go to ICU or do I stay with my wife? So I went to ICU, and my daughter was, given antibiotics and treatments and lumbar punctures and all that sort of stuff. And we were there for a couple of weeks. She was getting treatment for her condition, and so was my wife as well. So really, really difficult couple of weeks. And we finally got the good news that we could go home. But then my daughter developed a bump in the back of her head, just randomly. And that night was definitely the hardest night of our lives, where I think we've been so strong for a couple of weeks and held it together, and we were kind of on autopilot. But when we got this news and we could see the doctors were very clearly worried about us, it was really tough. We didn't know what it was. They were worried about blood clots and stuff like that. So we prayed all night, cried all night. There was a midwife called Nagme who came to join us, and she joined us and prayed and cried with us. And the next day we had an emergency MRI scan. And it's funny because in that 2 weeks of being in the hospital, I was lucky enough to move into the hospital with them. They gave us a room. Every 3 hours or so, and doctor and nurse would burst through the door and take one of them to ICU or give one of them their medication. And after that morning, after the MRI scan, we kind of waited back in our room and waited for that burst through the door. And when it eventually came, the nurse came in and gave us a massive hug and told us, it's okay. It's a bone structure. You can go home, which was, the best feeling. So we went home, and I think that was the end, but the start. So it was definitely the end of that period in hospital, but the start of our new chapter, being at home as parents, both struggling with the trauma of what had just happened, finding it very difficult to accept, to understand, to process what we'd been through. In the UK, we get 2 weeks off as dads, paternity leave. So it was, for me, back to work after a few days at home. And so going back into a fairly senior, demanding job, but with, a wife who's diagnosed with post-natal anxiety, a new baby, all the stresses that come with being a new parent anyway, and my own feelings of not being able to understand what had happened, not processing that, not getting any support. I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD. I was having nightmares and flashbacks and anxiety and stuff like that. So for me, it's that experience that kind of got me very, very interested in supporting working dads, in dads and men's mental health, in ideas about masculinity and what it means to be a man. So I was working in kind of D&I anyway, but so I had a good foundation and a basis of some of the issues, but kind of that real life experience really brought it out to me. And since then, I've really dedicated my life really to this work, and started my platform, Music Football Fatherhood, and all the stuff that we do within that. And gone on to do stuff around the media and obviously stuff with corporate organizations as well. And that's why I'm here now talking to you, Nikki. Is that experience has really brought me here.
What a powerful story, and I can't even begin to imagine how that felt at the time, but how you've used that and processed it to do such good in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one. I look back and think it was obviously a difficult period, but my wife said the other day, she was like, "Your mess is your message. Your mess is your message."
Oh, love that.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can take it. You can take it.
Thank you.
But I was like, yeah, it was true. Like, sometimes we go through difficult periods and we come out the other side and we learn so much, and I think for me, it was obviously very, very the most difficult period of my life, but I think it's part of my purpose, and part of maybe why I was put here, to be able to do the work I'm doing now and help other people ultimately. So yeah, I'm grateful for the experience now. I think it's made me a better person. Definitely. I'm way more understanding, patient, empathetic, all those sort of things I think come with parenting anyway. But when you've been through such an experience, I think that's amplified as well.
Absolutely. So you mentioned there about Music Football Fatherhood and how that was born. Can you share a bit more about what it is and kind of what support you offer?
So we're a parenting platform for men, and we are all about open conversations around fatherhood. That's our thing. Everything that we do comes back to that. So we try to have open conversations, deep conversations, and connect people, talk about the things that maybe aren't mainstream or aren't generally accepted, and create spaces to do that in a variety of different ways. So we do that through content and community. So our content side of things is our blog. So we get dads to write on our website. We've got about 270 articles, I think it is, from different men who are writing about all types of things around fatherhood. People are writing about how to keep your relationship alive in the first couple of years when you're both tired and busy as new parents, how to find time for date nights, stuff like that, to are you comfortable talking to your daughter about periods and and puberty, and how do you navigate those conversations, to miscarriage and loss and fertility. So a range of different articles on the website. And we also have a podcast called Daddy Debates, where we have one-to-one conversations, a bit like what we're having now, with different dads about their experiences, and we cover loads of different topics through there. And then on our community side of things, we do monthly meetups. So for dads, they're called The Lodge, and they're on Zoom once a month. So every month we'll have a guest speaker, we'll have a topic that we kind of decide on. We'll have a guest speaker that comes along and talks about that. And then we have breakout groups. It's just a space for dads to connect and share, really. So we've done things around mental health, around active listening. We had a vision board party in January. So, a range of different things, which is really, really powerful. And one of the things I'm probably most excited about in the community side of it is our partnership with football clubs. So we've worked with Queen's Park Rangers. We've got events coming up with Watford and hopefully Arsenal as well. So we take our community and their community to the football stadium, and we have a tour of the stadium. We open up conversations about mental health and masculinity and gender roles and stuff like that. And I love that. I'm a big football fan. So for me, that's like, a dream come true. And from all that stuff has come our book, Dad, Untold Stories of Fatherhood, Love, Mental Health and Masculinity, which is, by far my most proudest professional achievement. 20 men that have shared their stories from such a personal place, and the book's done so well in terms of connecting with people, but commercially as well. And so proud of the book and all it's done. It's really changed my life completely. Really changed my life.
I started to read your book when I was away recently, and oh my gosh, the stories are incredible. And I mentioned to you before we hit record, I mentioned it to a male friend of mine, and his brother's having kind of him and his wife are having fertility issues, and it's been a really difficult journey for them. And I just mentioned it to my male friend, and he was like, oh my God, this is so needed. And kind of like his eyes lit up, and he was like, oh, I'm definitely going to share it with my brother. And the stories are so honest. And so, as you said, you've used the word deep several times. And that's really struck me about every time I've had a conversation with you or read anything related to the work you're doing. It kind of, you're going beneath the surface conversations to really get into those authentic, kind of vulnerable kind of conversations. And I just love what you're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it is the depth, isn't it? For me, it's taken a while to get here. When MFF first started, I wasn't in that space personally to be able to facilitate that. But now kind of understanding what people experience, and there's people are experiencing some stuff. A lot of the dads that we speak to, or a lot of the dads just out there, have been through a lot. And we need to start speaking about it. It's not always about solutions, but we need to start sharing our stories. And so the more I've kind of been comfortable sharing my story, I think that it makes me comfortable for others. So every time I'm very public about what I've experienced, that gives license to other people to share with me and with our community. So yeah, I think that depth is something that we try to do. It's not about numbers for us. It's not about how many dads or how many sales or how many people come to our events. It's more about what's the depth of the conversation we're having. That's the important thing for me.
And that really strikes me. So obviously, traditionally, men haven't been encouraged to talk openly about their emotions and kind of really given permission to be vulnerable. What impact do you think that this has had on men that then become fathers and their whole experience of kind of coming into fatherhood?
Yes, I was doing an event the other day, and I was talking about mental health, and I asked a question to the audience: why don't men speak enough about mental well-being and how they're feeling? And one guy said he doesn't know how to. He's never had any practice. And I was like, wow, that's really powerful. This guy must have been maybe in his 40s. He said he doesn't know how to. He's never had any practice. And I just thought that kind of summarizes it right there, right? Like, a lot of guys have grown up with certain ideas about how you are and how open you can be and how vulnerable you can be and how much you can share your challenges, whether that's with your friends and family, your parents, your school teachers. We're kind of trained, a lot of us were trained to get on with it, to be the guy, to be strong, and the model of success and what success looks like does not include openness and talking about your challenges. So we are then, surprised when these men become dads and they find it difficult to share their challenges as fathers. But when you think about it logically, it's to be expected, because it's very difficult to ask someone who hasn't had any practice of speaking about their challenges to suddenly do it. It's not always so easy for some people. So I think we need to, when we're looking at this issue, it's about kind of generational. It's about childhood. It's about how we are raising the next set of dads, and what we are teaching them about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a dad and what success looks like. But of course, though, I don't think, older men and people, I'm in my 30s, my age are it's too late for us. But we need spaces, we need spaces to be able to talk about these things. Some people are going to be further on in their journey than others. For me, it's about approach. There's the stereotype and there's the idea that men don't talk, and that's definitely true. But from my experience, if you get men in the right environment and you do some storytelling, and you make them feel safe, they will most definitely they will talk. And we've had so many sessions, where a guy will turn up and, you make assumptions about people. So someone might come, they're quite big built, they've got a big beard and they're kind of, they just seem like a man's man, and you just wouldn't expect anything. And they come in the room, and the amount of times by the end, they're the one that has the most interesting story, that said the most honest things, that set the tone for the whole conversation. And I think it's really important for us to really think about those assumptions that we're making, when we see people and we assume things about people's lives. But don't assume, we're all going through stuff. And if we set the right environment, men will talk and men will open up. And I think it's one thing to ask men to do that, but we also have to ask ourselves about how we're being allies to be able to ensure that can happen. How do we receive that conversation? How do we behave and respond when someone opens up to us? Because that's going to dictate whether they continue to do it in the future. So I think there's a lot of work for everyone to do here.
Oh, you've said so many great things there. One of the things
I said a lot, didn't I? There was a lot.
It was. Excuse me. Where my thoughts were going was when you were talking about that guy with the beard, and it made me think about how Brené Brown talks about how we armor up to our vulnerability and about the armor that we put on, and often we might see somebody and see all this armor and assume they're not willing to be vulnerable don't know how to do it, or they're never going to do it. And yet they've obviously just developed quite strong armor over time.
Yeah, certainly. I think all of us, whether it's we go to the gym loads and, we work on our physical appearance, or whether it's we make people laugh and we always, put on a smile, whether it's our dress and how much we spend on looking good in our clothes, we all put on an image for the world, don't we? And not to say that, life can't be good. Like, my life is great at the moment and it's really good, and there's ups and downs, of course. So it's not all doom and gloom, of course, but there are times in anyone's life when there's going to be difficult moments, and that's just part of the human experience. We can't get away from that. No one is immune, and that's definitely not gendered as well. That's just part of the human experience. And it's about how we as men are going to navigate those difficult parts of life.
But I think what you're doing is so important in terms of role modeling it, and then being that ally, as you say, to provide that psychological safety and space. It's just making me think about I've got a 9-year-old son, and I've trained in emotional intelligence nearly 20 years ago now, so way before I became a mum. And so a big part of, my parenting is about helping him develop the vocabulary and around his emotions, and to express them. And it's something that I will pick other people up, if I hear any of those, come on, be a brave boy, big boys don't cry, and that is just not acceptable language for me, and I will challenge it. Yet what is really fascinating, in the last 6 months, I've noticed a real shift in him, where if he feels upset, I can see the vulnerability in him and he'll close it off. And I'm like, it's kicking in. And noticing that I need to work harder as a parent to help him feel safe to lean into those feelings, to express them. And I'm like, that kind of societal conditioning is really starting to kick in now.
That's so interesting that you're observing that in real time, isn't it? But I think, my daughter's 6, and you can definitely, in her short life, see how when they're younger, you can kind of, you're their world, and you can kind of shape them so much when they need you so much, right? Like they're with you a lot, so they need a lot from you. So you are their everything when they go to school, and as they get older and they have different friends and they watch different TV programs, whatever it is, their understanding of the world becomes broader. Then we are not just their only influence. And there's different influences. And I think it's about, getting other people involved as well, understanding, I think, as parents, what we can do. Of course, we can do a lot, but also how we shape the environment for them. We moved my daughter's school actually recently, and I think it was the best decision that we've made, because now the environment that she's in, I think, is just so much more fitting for who she is, and her being able to be herself, and I guess what we want her to learn about the world. So I think environment plays a massive part, doesn't it? It's not unfortunately only what we as parents can do. It's surrounded by.
And the more they grow up, the less influence we have over that. So, but obviously the mental health statistics for men are still pretty shocking. And clearly that has an impact, particularly when you collide with fatherhood. So you're really all about championing better support for new dads, and kind of not just new dads, but the kind of fatherhood journey. In an ideal world, what support would you like to see in place?
So I think it's holistic, and it covers so many different areas. I think I'll start from a kind of healthcare perspective, and then kind of broaden out. I think so. When we're thinking about healthcare, I think it's about engaging dads early in the maternity process. And actually, I've just been asked to do a session I live in Watford, with GPs in Hertfordshire about their role in engaging dads throughout the maternity process. And we've worked a lot with different NHS trusts and midwives and maternity teams to help them think about how do they engage that dad early. So from that very first scan, 6-week scan, do you understand how to bring that dad into the conversation. There's something around language there. There's something around body language. There's something around understanding how that man may be feeling. There's something around having resources available where the dad can kind of learn more about the process and what kind of dad he wants to be. And I think there's stuff through the maternity process that midwives can definitely do a lot better to help that dad feel fully included in the process, rather than sometimes like a third wheel. And I think that's probably been amplified in the pandemic as well, where there's been a lack of access to services, for good reason. But we're hearing a lot of men feeling even more alienated from that process. And of course, I'm not putting all the blame on midwives. I think dads definitely need to play their part as well and be proactive and get involved and demand more. But it's a two-way thing. So the midwives can learn more about that man and how to ensure he is involved through the process. I think then when it comes to birthing, especially traumatic birth, there's actions there that can be taken around information for the dad, in terms of support for the dad, straight after and in the months to come as well, and home visits. So there's so much to do to just engage the dad. We know that if dads are engaged in that maternity process, they're more likely to reach out to the NHS for mental health support. 39% of dads are concerned about their mental health, and 1 in 10 will experience some kind of postnatal depression symptoms in the first 6 months. And if they are not engaged in the process, it's very unlikely that they're going to then seek that support. And I think the interesting thing with men's and dads' mental health is that it's not that dads have reported more mental health issues than women. They're just a lot less likely to seek support from it, and much more likely to take their own life. So I think there's so much that can be done through the health services, but also through workplaces. I work with a lot of corporates doing support around the issues that I've spoken about, and there are loads that workplaces can do. There's paternity leave packages, equalising maternity and paternity. There's extended shared parental leave, leadership and culture. There's buddying systems. There's inclusive parenting networks. Support for return to work. There's so much stuff that workplaces could do. And, we spend so much of our time at work. Work shapes so much of our experience on a day-to-day basis. So I think for workplaces to think about how they support dads is very, very important. And we've actually just launched the Working Dads Employer Awards, which is something we've done in collaboration with the University of Birmingham. And partners include, Business in the Community and the CBI and Working Families. And that's going to be in Parliament on the 24th of May. And we're celebrating employers that are doing lots of work to support dads. There's 4 categories: flexible working, inclusive leadership and culture, support for return to work, and parenting policies. So, through that, we'll be able to share best practice about what good looks like in terms of supporting working dads. And then I'll go on to society. So we've done the NHS and health services, the workplace, and I think, dads can need more support through friends, family, and just society as a whole. And by that, I mean kind of, resources that dads can read, community groups that dads can go to, inclusive family groups for, new parents who have babies and want to get out of the house and do baby yoga or whatever it is, making sure that's inclusive to dads. So much, just the holistic support, making sure there's neutral changing rooms in play centers and gyms, so a dad can take their baby and not feel like they have to go into the women's toilet and feel awkward about that. So, there's all those sort of things that play like a massive part as well. And, out of those kind of 3 pockets, I don't know if one is more important than the other. I think it's about all of them improving and all of them getting better. And then once we do that, we're going to have more dads, being active parents, being fully involved, and that's going to have better outcomes for themselves and their mental health and well-being, but also their partner's experience as mothers in the workplace. But most importantly, the children. We know that when there's two parents involved at the beginning, and that child is learning so much in that first 1,001 days, from conception to 2 years old, that kind of shapes a lot of their outcomes around resilience and education and well-being. So I think there's so many reasons why we need to do this. There's a lot of work to do.
And I love that you're thinking about it in such a systemic way, because actually for change to happen and the culture to shift, it has to be at all those different levels and layers. And I think you've just expressed that so brilliantly. When you were talking about starting with kind of the antenatal piece of how we include dads. You mentioned earlier that you did hypnobirthing, and we did as well with our firstborn, and what a difference that made, because actually having, we paid for it privately. So this wasn't something at the time that would have been available to everybody, but just knowing that how the father was engaged in that process and how empowered my husband felt in the process about what he could do, what role or purpose he could have, how, we were empowering ourselves as a couple, but then he had a specific purpose. That shifted everything for us in terms of that birth experience. And like yourselves, our birth didn't go to plan, and we ended up being in and out of hospital, and just knowing that, my husband at that time felt empowered enough in the process, even though it kind of went off-piste, was so important. And so I think it's great that the work that you're doing with the NHS to have those conversations right through to challenging at a kind of society level, the things that, the biases that kind of hold fathers back from feeling empowered.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is about, as you're saying with your husband, he and for me as well, the hypnobirthing really helped. It kind of gave you a purpose, an understanding of what your role is here, and it helped so much. Obviously the birth didn't go to plan, but a lot of the stuff we learned, even just about breathing exercises and stuff like that, and just the importance of the support and how you can support. Those are things that you can kind of, they transcend just pregnancy and birth. They are kind of just life skills that you can use in your relationship. And so I think but that holistic way of looking at things, I think any change is not simple, and sometimes people like to boil it down to the one thing you would do, and unfortunately with a lot of these kind of issues, whether we're talking about what we're talking about today, or whether we're talking about any other kind of diversity and inclusion characteristic or problem, there's always layers, and there's always different parts of it, and it's a complicated picture. Not to say that it can't be done, but it just, I guess, it needs to be approached in a systemic way where we are looking holistically, but then also looking at the individual parts and saying what can we do here to improve that. So we try to do stuff on the whole. Our societal work is with dads through our book, through our community, through our social media. We try to play our part there. Our work with the NHS is what we can do there. There's lots of other people doing work as well. I should say in Manchester, there's Dad Matters, which are a great organisation. They are run by Home Start, and they're an integrated paternity service in the maternity process. There's a guy called Mark Williams who does loads of stuff around mental health advocacy, and Dr. Andy Sayers. There's loads of people doing stuff in the NHS space, and in the workspace. I would say we're doing a lot of work in the workspace to try and improve employers' support. But we all playing our part. The work you're doing, it plays a part in it. We're all trying to do our bit to see this change.
And something that really struck me, because one of the questions that I've got is about actually what advice would you give any mothers listening about how they can help create more equal parenting? And, when I say that, I think there's a need for dads to do stuff, but we don't operate in isolation, do we? It's a kind of symbiotic relationship. And there was something that you talked about when we were on our parental burnout panel, and you talked about maternal gatekeeping, and I was like, oh, I'm fascinated by this. I would love to know more. And I was just wondering if you'd got any advice for any mother listening about actually what can we do to help make the shift culturally, society, and I suppose any change starts with us as individuals. What are the kind of things that you could share, insights that you've gained from the hundreds of thousands of men that you've spoken to, about what we can be doing as mothers to help make that shift?
Yes, first of all, I think it's important to say that I think the onus definitely is on dads. First and foremost, it's about dads being a bit more brave, being a bit more upfront in their workplaces, putting themselves forward, getting their hands dirty. So the onus definitely is on, first and foremost, on dads. But I think where you said we live in a world together, and we're in relationships, and it's not as straightforward as the dad just standing up and taking action. We do need to do this collectively. So I think maternal gatekeeping very interesting. So maternal gatekeeping, I guess, is what will generally happen. If you have a couple just had a baby, and say, for example, that mum is taking maternity leave and she's off for a while at home, the dad's in full-time work, what can generally happen is that the mum will have her ways of doing things. So she'll know how she settles the baby, how she changes the nappy, she may be breastfeeding. So she'll have a kind of routine and a way of doing things. And sometimes it's a very with my daughter, there's a certain way that I would hold my daughter that stopped her crying. So sometimes it's very these minute little details, and the mum will have that figured out and know exactly how things work, kind of thing, in their way. And then the dad's kind of been at work, and he comes home, and now he's trying to get involved and settle the baby and feed and change and all that sort of stuff. And what we hear a lot is that, because the dad is obviously trying to do stuff, he might do stuff differently, just because that's how we're humans. We have our own styles. The mum might be like, "Oh no, this is how I've done it. This is how to do it. This is how you do this. This is how you do that." Rather than letting that dad kind of just learn to, what we call, parent on his own, and learn to make mistakes, and learn that the baby's going to have to adjust to that dad, and learn to have to figure it out themselves, and that baby will feel comfortable with his dad. He's got to kind of go through the process of learning how to work with each other. What can often happen is that the mum will see the baby crying or want things done a certain way, and that can kind of create a distance where the dad feels like he doesn't have any control over of how he parents, and he's doing things wrong, and he's kind of like a nuisance. And then he ends up kind of distancing himself because maybe the baby cries and he's not getting it the way that the mum wants it to be done. So he can kind of feel like, okay, well, I'll just go and wash up, or I'll just go and do other stuff, and that distance creates, he doesn't actually learn how to parent by himself. So I think it's about letting dads make the mistakes, letting him learn how to parent by himself, letting him learn to find his way. It may be different, it may be messier, but he's got to figure out how to do it by himself. I always remember when my daughter was about 6 or 7 months old, I think it was, and there were 3 of us that we met. We actually met at this dad's baby massage class, but we were going to meet up just in a local park, and we were in a WhatsApp group, us, 3 dads, and 2 of us were like, yeah, we're going to take our babies out to the park, which is literally just across the road. And the 3rd dad, he was up for it, but then on the day he said he couldn't make it, and we were like, oh, what's up? And it turns out, because his wife couldn't come with us, that he didn't feel comfortable taking his baby out on his own. And literally, this is just across the road, like it wasn't far. And at that time, it really hit home that if for whatever reason, I don't know the ins and outs, but he didn't feel comfortable to take his baby across the road at that age, which is kind of sad. It's kind of sad. And I think it does play into the part of maybe the dad being at work all the time. He finds it more difficult to build a bond, can find it more difficult to build that bond with the baby. Maybe the baby's breastfeeding, and they haven't figured out a way of maybe navigating through that. But I think for mums, it's like encouraging dads to just learn themselves, giving them the baby as early as possible for a couple of hours. The confidence that dad's going to then gain of like, I can look after my baby myself. I can take them out. I can learn to deal with whatever's going to happen. I am the primary parent in this space. I have the confidence, and that confidence as a parent by yourself is so important. And the earlier that dads can pick that up, the better for everyone. So I think that's what maternal gatekeeping is. I would say, other than that though, it's, when we spoke earlier around the allyship in conversation and understanding that, as a mum, no doubt you're going through loads of stuff as a new parent. It's very challenging, but also just, understanding that dad has also gone through a massive kind of life change as well. Biologically, physically, psychologically. Like, a lot of people don't know that for some dads, testosterone levels can drop when they become a new parent. And that's that primal instinct that is God gave us to adapt so we can be more nurturing. So some of us will have a experience a drop in testosterone, and that can obviously kind of affect balance and mood and stuff like that. But obviously a massive change in terms of tiredness and in terms of mental load and overwhelm. Of course mums experience that, but dads will experience that too. And I think sometimes there's the idea that, because the dad didn't go through the pregnancy and through the labor, that he hasn't been through a massive life change, but he has as well. So, first and foremost, it's just understanding that, and then, being open to talk about that, helping him to find support, whether that's what you can do as a couple and supporting each other in that way, or maybe it's directing him to other ways where he can talk to different men and different dads. So I think, it's just that understanding that he has also been through a massive life change too, and just to keep that in mind. And I think it's a difficult one because when people ask me for advice for parenting, and I don't really have any advice, to be honest, because I don't know how to put a baby to sleep. Like I don't know I don't know a lot of the stuff about practically to look after your baby, so I really don't like to give advice. But the one thing I do say is just like communicate with each other, because the most important thing is that you are kind of sacrificing for each other. So you are going to do extra for your partner, your wife, and they will do extra for you. And as long as you're putting each other first and putting each other's well-being first, you're going to be okay. It can be very difficult when people start counting about how much they've done, and I've done this and you've done that and blah, blah, blah. That's a recipe for disaster. But if you're both of the mindset of like, look, the most important thing to me is my family, and everyone's thinking like that, you're going to look after each other. When you're tired, she might do a bit more. When she's tired, you do a bit more. You have your responsibilities that you split up. You're both doing what you can for the family. And that's what we encourage. I don't know how to put your baby to sleep. I don't know how to fit the car seat. Well, I do, but I don't know how to fit your car seat. But the only advice I've got for you is just communicate with each other. That's the main thing.
Oh, and I think that's such a powerful one. And it's often what can fall by the wayside when you're putting a new baby first is, the communication can suffer, as you say, because you're tired, you're feeling more vulnerable, and that can start to slip. So I was going to ask the question, but I think you may have just answered it. But I was going to say, what if there was just one thing that you hope a mum who's listening to this and what you're saying takes away? What would that be?
So I think it's just an understanding, before I became a dad, I had no idea I couldn't speak like I'm speaking now. I've learned so much about dad's experience from the people I've spoken to, the research around mental health, the research around gender roles and ideas of masculinity, and all those sort of things. They're very new to me. This is information that I've only got over the last few years. In my earlier years, I would not have had this information. So I think a lot of people will come to this conversation quite new, potentially, or maybe they've been thinking things, but maybe this conversation has just helped to kind of formulate those ideas. So I would hope it's just an understanding, really. I think it's an understanding. I think it's and taking that understanding into the relationships that you have with your partner or your brother or your colleague or your son, and just thinking a bit more about, okay, this is potentially what they may be experiencing now or some point in their life. How can I help? And I think that would be the main thing I'd ask people to take away from it.
Thank you, Elliott. It's just making me think, as you were speaking then, about how grateful I am for the work that you're doing and how you're shifting the narrative, because hopefully by the time my son, if he chooses to have children, in the future, the landscape will hopefully be a lot different for dads.
I hope so. It is changing a lot, It's just over the last 5 years. It's even on social media, I'm seeing on LinkedIn, there's so many more dads sharing about their paternity leave. It's small shifts, but things are changing. So much more companies that are now offering extended paternity leave. I think in a few years it'll be abnormal for a company not to offer at least 6 weeks fully paid, I would say. So things are definitely shifting, and things are changing.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. So I'm sure people are going to want to find out more about you, your work, your book. Where would you point people to? And I can put all the links in the show notes.
So yeah, thank you for having me, Nikki. This has been great. It's been a really, really good conversation. I've loved it. So people can find me. I would say a few things. I'd say I presented a BBC documentary in January. It's called Becoming Dad. So if you go on the iPlayer and you type in Becoming Dad, then it's a half an hour documentary all about all the stuff we've spoken about today. To be honest, about dad's mental health is the main area. I speak to government, I speak to the NHS, I speak to a lot of expectant dads. So definitely check out Becoming Dad. I would say you can go onto Amazon and have a look at the dad book. So you put in Elliott Rae and Dad, and it will come up Untold Stories of Fatherhood, Love, Mental Health, Masculinity. It's a bright blue and yellow cover. So 20 dads sharing their stories. Please do check that out. And then for everything else, for our community events, our podcast, our blogs, me and my speaking and my facilitation in workplaces, if you go to MusicFootballFatherhood.com, and you'll see all the information that's clearly set out there. So yeah, please do have a look and follow us and engage.
Brilliant. And I'll put all the links in, and I would highly recommend watching the Becoming Dad and getting the dad book. And it's something that I will now, for any friends or family that have children, I will be buying that for the dads. I always get the mum a gift, but it will be part of the gift that I will give to new and expectant parents. So thank you, Elliott. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.